integrate a little bit of insights as well that are useful if you're a first speaker, because obviously otherwise it's only useful for half of you. I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of rebuttal and weighing also comes into first speeches, but I will flag it when we get there. Maybe first of all, some credits. I made a similar workshop before on rebuttal together with Ido van den Hout, who's my Euros partner, or has been one of my first Euros partners. So also credits for him for his ideas, as well as to PowerPoint. We made my PowerPoint actually looks very, very fancy. Maybe I can just ask a question before we start. Like, when you think about rebuttal and weighing and about this workshop, what are like questions you have? What are things you want to learn? Maybe I can try to integrate those and see if we can make it more useful. Does anyone dare to speak up about that, with that?
I have something.
Sure.
So for rebuttal, for me, it's always quite difficult to gauge how much time I have to spend on rebuttal before like their case is kind of properly taken down. And often I hear from judges afterwards it was like either way too short or like way too long, so you could have had many more arguments of your own.
Yeah, I think the question really depends on what the other teams do. And I think it goes to prioritization, which is in my workshop. I hope we will get there because I got an hour, I think, and it's at the very end of it, but I will try to rush it and get there. Are there other things that questions you have, things you want to learn about in this workshop?
I guess maybe making your rebuttal sound stronger and not easy to rebuttal again from the other side, because it's, I think, the main problem of my speeches.
Is it like making the rebuttal sound stronger, or is it?
I'm sorry. Making arguments in rebuttal stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Sound stronger.
Cool. I will probably touch upon that when I'm talking about rebuilding, and I'll try to flag it when I get there, if that's okay. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I'll just get started with whatever I have on my slides and try to fit any questions you have along the way in. Also, don't be scared to actually speak up. Again, I cannot see you, so I have no other means of communicating with you, unfortunately, throughout my workshop. I hope that's fine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, is the question more related to what you should rebut or how you should rebut each specific argument? Is it like you have troubles with picking which arguments are worthy of rebuttal, or is it picking which part of the argument you should rebut? We'll definitely get there. Cool. I also wrote them down, so I'm trying to flag them along the way. Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. Give me more.
I think that it's very important to get into to understand what part of the case is the main part and what is just a description to rebuttal the correct thing. Maybe it was told earlier, but I also want to revise to myself how to speak in English. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I can help you that much with speaking English in one workshop, unfortunately, but I can definitely talk about...
No, I don't want it for you to help me. I just wanted to revise for myself.
Mm-hmm. No, but definitely what you talked about when you talked about which arguments you should rebut is definitely in it, and it relates a little bit to what Lisa already said about allocating time. So it's sort of the same thing, right? What argument should I rebut? What argument should I leave? What should I try to weigh? What should I just, what's not relevant within the debate? I think these are good questions. And that also exemplifies how much you already know about BP. So far you've been beating my expectations. But maybe I'll just start with some very, very basic framing, which is why we kind of care about this idea of rebuttal and mechanization, or like not mechanization, weighing. It's probably because when we're starting to debate and when we view the debate, we often tend to be very egocentric in how we debate, right? That is, you prepare for 15 minutes, you then talk for another 7 minutes as well as your partner does, and it all sounds very convincing. We're often tending towards a situation where we often think of our own cases as very, very true, very proven, as well as very important. Obviously, that's what we want to have, but realistically, this is not something that's gonna happen within the debate. And therefore, we need interaction. That is, you can't only focus on your own case, you also need to engage with what other teams are saying, even if it sounds stupid to you, even if it sounds less important to you. I think that's sort of the basic of what rebuttal and weighing is, and often a very big pitfall in which a lot of debaters fall. Because likely this is the debate according to the judges, right? That is, probably some amount of truth has been proven on your side, which is maybe slightly more than what your opponent has said, but maybe your importance is less, which means you then need to do more weighing in order to compensate for these things, or prove why the fact that you've done more mechanization, so you've proven the likelihood instead of the importance more, is actually more important within the debate. These are all aspects that we're going to cover, because often they decide upon which who wins the debate. There's a little bit of an extra complication here, because I just showed you 2 pictures. That is, this ideal debate version, which is obviously unrealistic, this version which is probably realistic, but this is sort of what we're actually dealing with, right? That is, we don't actually know what judges find important within the debate, what they find proven within the debate. So often it's sort of a guessing game. And I think the best way to think about it is just every argument in itself is a coin flip on whether the judges will buy it or won't buy it. And often when you're participating in a debate, you are quite biased in this. Your arguments themselves feel proven, other arguments feel stupid, and obviously your arguments are also more important, right? And although this may be true, first of all, this may not be true, right? You might just be biased. But second of all, it's also good to realize that judges are humans, and humans are lazy. They will not write everything down you say within your speech. They will not get every argument, and they will not always believe the things that you think are intuitive. So what you want to do is to kind of bias the coin flip in your favor. You do that by simply explaining more stuff, because at the point where you explain more stuff, it also makes it more likely that you fill in gaps that the judge actually want to be perceived. That is, judges are anyway more likely to buy things once you give them more reasons to believe that thing. The opposite is also true. That is, if you just throw a lot of rebuttal towards a specific argument on your opponent's side, it's more likely that the judges will actually buy it. I think this is the very basic of what rebuttal and weighing is. That is, it's more of a game on time allocation rather than being right. That's also what the next slide is about. I think the basic questions you have in debate is that you ultimately have to prove 2 things. And they're always comparative, and they're always relative to the other teams, right? You always have to prove why my argument is more right or likelier to happen, or why my argument is more important. And you can win on both these metrics, but overall, holistically, you have to win, right? That is, you can probably get away with not having that much of an important argument, but insofar as you're the team that has proven that argument, you can probably win with that strategy. The opposite can also be true. That means that often you can sort of play with these 2 questions and do the weighing or rebuttal accordingly. If you view the cases that teams bring according to these 2 questions, you often have a very good idea of what a case is going to do within the debate and how judges are going to interpret it. I guess this is sort of the framing of what rebuttal and weighing is, but so far, like everything I said is kind of intuitive, but also not really helpful, right? I guess it kind of shifts our question to a few other things. That is also a few questions that you already raised. That is, how do I do it? How do I know if I've done enough? How do I prioritize these things? But also, how do I structure them? I will go through each of these questions, and I hope I will have enough time for them to cover all of them, and try to kind of give my view on these questions. That's not to say that these are the only right answers to the question. I think a very big thing on rebuttal and weighing is also just incorporating and engaging with more strategies over time. So you have like a bigger toolbox to take strategies from, which means it's more likely that you will find a strategy that works for you in that specific moment in the debate. Because at the end of the day, debate is very stressful, it's high pressure, and you have to come up with answers really, really quickly, right? That means that often just having multiple tools within your toolbox is probably going to be more helpful for you in actually getting to good rebuttal and weighing within that specific moment of the debate. So I wanted to start with simply how to do it, also because I think it's the most important thing within this workshop, also raises the most questions. There's roughly 3 things that you can do when you're a second speaker. That is, you can rebuild your case. That is, your first speaker brought something, but there's an opponent that has raised questions and has rebutted that to a certain extent. That means that you might need to do some rebuilding, or your speaker might have just left some gaps which you then needed to fill in. The second thing that you can do is rebutting, which is trying to throw shade and throw doubt on the other team's cases, making it more likely that the judges will discard those cases in favor of yours. And thirdly, you can do positioning within the debate and weighing. That is not necessarily proving something more, but more explaining why what you've proven is actually the thing that should be credited the most by judges and therefore winning within the debate. I think these are the 3 things I want to talk about. Is everyone still following along so far?
Yep.
Cool.
Sure.
Of course.
Cool. So I'll just go through all of them, starting with rebuilding. I think the nice thing about rebuilding when you're a second speaker is that you're always in a better position, because I tend to speak both quite flexibly. That is, sometimes I speak first, sometimes I speak second. And what I tend to notice that as a first speaker, it's really, really hard to predict what's actually going to happen with the debate and what the response to your case is going to be. You don't know what the other teams are going to say and what they're going to pinpoint towards. Often you miss a burden, or you were supposed to explain something that you don't skip over because you haven't thought of that in preparation, right? As a second speaker, you're in a very unique position. That is, you always have had some kind of response to the case of your partner, which means you're in a better information position. So therefore, you know what is likely going to be the rebuttal towards your case, which means it's also more likely that you can effectively rebuild it to make it stronger. There's roughly 2 things on which you can focus and which you have to focus when you do rebuilding. That is, firstly, just listen to your partner. I think a lot of the times what second speakers tend to do is not really listen to what their partner said. And I guess it's obvious because you've already talked about your case in preparation. You assume your partner is going to bring that kind of stuff. So why should you listen to them and actually still try to write down what they missed? I think ultimately it's good to remember that your partner isn't going to bring everything you thought they would do in preparation, because they have their own perspective on the debate. They might emphasize different elements, and they might rush over other elements that you actually thought were important or that turn out to be important within the debate. Therefore, it's ultimately very nice if you actually listen to their speech and therefore also notice when they don't talk about stuff that you either talked about in preparation and that they just skim over within their speech, or burdens you think they should be talking about, or mechanization or like arguments you don't think were as persuasive, right? Like, I feel like we all have this moment where we're listening to our partners and we're like, yeah, I'm sorry, but this makes no sense at all, right? I feel like these are the moments where you should be like, yeah, probably I can fill something in there. This is the position you have. You can always speak after your partner and fill in these gaps. Another very good strategy is often to just ask your partner, because your partner has just done their speech. Most often when I do my speeches, I don't get through all my notes, or I might know what point in the debate I wasn't as strong in explaining it. That means that often your partner already knows to a certain level where they screwed up, which means it's also immediate material for you to actually rebuild it. So after your partner is finished speaking, and when you have this moment where the judge is like, oh, announcing the next speaker, maybe just ask your partner, be like, do you feel like you missed anything? Because if so, you can still incorporate it into your speech. It's still useful material for you. I think the questions you should then be asking yourself with both these things, right? So we talked about identification strategies. So listen to your partner's speech and ask them where they fucked up. That is, the questions you should then be asking is, was it obvious why it mattered within the debate? So was it positioned well? And this is where you do weighing, and I will get to it slightly later. The other thing, which I will mostly focus on, is just, is it well explained? Is it intuitive to the judges what was meant by my partner? And often this is something that you already have on your paper when you also did a little bit of writing during preparation. What should be the burdens that your partner has had to match, or what are the arguments that your partner ultimately skipped? This is sort of information that you then already have, which means it's more likely that you can do a better job than them. I think the other strategy is just look at what the rebuttal to your partner's case was, because often this gives you a very good indication of it. And I think a very important nuance here is try to be as charitable as possible, because especially if you're an opening, right? And I think this is important, especially if you're an opening. There are still two other teams that will engage with your case after you're done speaking. And you won't have that many opportunities anymore to actually rebut to their cases or to defend your case. That means that if you're not going to be charitable towards the only thing that does rebuttal to you, it is often quite hard to then see what the actual flaws within your case are. So try to engage with them in the most charitable way. Like try to take them at the very, very best case as if they've done the best rebuttal. So stuff like they didn't make this rebuttal effectively because they weren't mechanistically dense enough, or like fine enough. But ultimately, when people say something similar that might destroy your case, even if they were slightly better, that still is an indication for you to actually engage with it. I think often what's very, very nice to do within these debates is to also flag what you're trying to do, right? That is, often, I already talked about the fact that often judges tend to miss certain things within your case. And that means that they might also deprioritize things that your partner has said insofar as you try to redo it, right? Because it might be seen as confessing that you actually didn't do it well enough. I think to prevent this from happening, it's actually quite helpful to point it out in debates. Say stuff like, my partner told you something about this already, namely this stuff. So I will focus on a different element, namely this, which means the judges now don't have an opportunity to forget about the X part about it that was already said by a partner before. Other sentences are like, this is what the other team has said. We think that's unlikely or unimportant because of these reasons, right? You then flag the part of the rebuttal you're engaging with, which means it's more likely that the judges will actually credit it under that rebuttal. So maybe your judges will just be like, or alternatively will just be like, I have no clue what this person is talking about. I'm sure it's important, but I have no idea what part of rebuilding you're actually trying to do. The last one is just, if your opponent actually doesn't engage with you, then call it out. Be like, they didn't engage with this point. Because what often tends to happen is just that teams, if they don't know how to respond to an argument, just try to ignore it. And if the judges then forget about that argument, then you're kind of screwed, right? Because you made a very good argument, the judges screwed up, and because nobody interacted with it, it becomes forgotten within the debate. I don't think that's something that you want to be happening. So try to call out what the opponent does very, very carefully and try to relate everything within your speech. It really goes to the importance of flagging, which is very important in your second speech, because often it's kind of a messy thing to do, right? You're jumping from rebuilding to rebutting to weighing, and the structure is always sort of iffy how much effort you're going to put into it anyway, because as a first speaker, you can just bring all the burdens and all the mechanisms because that's kind of what you prepared for. And there's nothing really in the debate about that case. As a second speaker, you have a different role, namely you already have a case and now you need to do something with that case in debate. That means it's inherently sort of messier, which means flagging becomes also very, like, a lot more important for you to do. Cool. I wanted to do a little exercise maybe on just rebutting and see if you kind of have an intuition for it. So what I want to do is just make a very simple argument on the gov side of this house believes that capitalism has done more good than harm. And maybe you can tell me, you can rebut that argument. So I think the argument goes roughly as follows. That is, because of capitalism, we now incentivize geniuses within our society to actually work on the genius ideas they have, to market them, and to increase the value for society, such as Elon Musk now having a very good idea for electric cars, therefore building Teslas, which means now everyone lives in or like drives in a Tesla, which couldn't have happened on the other side, and also means that we now can effectively solve stuff like climate change. Does someone dare to try to rebut that argument? I heard a beep, but I cannot switch my screen, just for the record, so I have no idea what that meant.
Someone raised their hand, but oh yeah, okay. Start speaking because he can't see your raised hand.
I cannot see you, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at my PowerPoint right now.
Yeah, so may I speak now? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first thing that came to my mind is that it really depends on what background this geniuses come from, because if a genius is born into some kind of a poor family, then it will be way harder for them to access education and to develop their talents and so on, because the systemic factors will prevent them from doing so. And so kind of a lot of geniuses thus will not be able to develop their potential to the fullest.
I feel like that is fair. What if I tell you, sucks for you? You should just work harder. If you're genius enough, then probably capitalism will recognize you, because often when there's a market for something and an idea, then there's a lot of investors out there that are willing to put in money into very good ideas, because they often want their money value to increase, which means they're more likely to, or they're very likely to actually give you all these things that you think that you are lacking if you're not grown up in a very rich background. Anything?
Okay, let me. In the capitalism, everybody are thinking about their own happiness and their own money, so they mostly don't care about the nature, and they make a lot of factories and so on, and because of that the ecology is suffering. And it's on another hand, without this capitalism, we have less suffer for the nature.
I think that's a good argument. Is there anything else that people wanted to rebut towards this argument?
I wanted to a bit widen the argument about ecology and environment. So let's think about the providing thing and feature of the capitalism. We're making the products and we're making prices for them. We are loving or we are raising them according to actions and which is going on the market. So people are buying them because of the Oh, I forgot the word. I'm sorry.
No.
Because of the advertisement, programs, and because of their quality. The tendency of nowadays world is to make less quality, to make you to buy the same thing after a few years. Because it went broken. So in that case, we're gaining more money, but we are also spoiling more. We're also spoiling much bigger amount of resources, and in that case, we are influencing badly on environment.
Mm-hmm. I think these are all very good ideas. Maybe I can continue for time's sake, because I think there will be a little bit more interaction later on as well. But I think I wanted to point out something I noticed in your responses. First of all, that first response was really good. I'm not sure who it was, but saying that there are systemic factors that make geniuses actually not thrive, or like geniuses that aren't raised in the right environment not thrive within society because they're blocked from actually getting their genius out, is exactly clashing what I was saying, right? So what I was going for was saying geniuses get good ideas. These geniuses get benefited from capitalism because they now get those ideas out and therefore make money and improve society, right? If you're telling me that these geniuses actually cannot reach this endpoint, namely improve society, then you're effectively weakening my argument, right? If not completely overturning it. So that's very good engagement with my argument, specifically because it clashes and that is contradicting what I said. If you then do more explanation, because you didn't get the time for it, I get that. If you then do more explanation as to why it's more likely that systemic factors stop you from actually getting improvement, you're actually very, very likely to beat my entire argument. I think everything that was said about the ecology point is also very, very good. I think the nuanced difference is that it's a different impact. That is, these two things can coexist. I can be like, genius ideas get out of society for which we get nice innovations, and they may improve climate change. And you can be like, capitalism builds factories and therefore and consumers buy a lot of stuff now, and therefore you get bad climate change. I think this is two things that can coexist within a debate, and therefore it's not necessarily rebuttal because they don't attack the same burdens within the argument. Even though it's still a very valid argument to run, it's not engaging with what I just said. Does everyone see the difference between these two things? If not, just shout to me.
Okay, may I try to ask?
Sure.
As my colleagues before said about the equality, the ecology, and so on, and as I understood in this sentence, capitalism has done more good than harm.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very big, a very overall argument, and I believe that it should be rebuttal with the same big and not I don't know, argumented argument, if I can say so. For example, the first thing that came on my mind was that capitalism, it's about money, and money gives control. So the most rich capitalists have more control on other people, and I believe it's also might rebuttal that capitalism is your sentence, and also it may rebuttal your rebuttal that geniuses may become better than others, or they can get their goods also. So we can rebuttal it with the sentence about the controlling people and about the will, the human will. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you can say that people that are on top of capitalism control most of the money and therefore also distribute the resources, but then you sort of have to prove why they won't give it to these geniuses, right? I guess it's doable. So it's a good rebuttal. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to get into all the mechanistic depth you need to have a functioning debate, because otherwise we'll be sitting here for 2 hours and we can just do this as a debate, but we'll do a debate later on. But I think overall what you tend to see is that there is a lot of responses that are possible to different parts of my argument, right? That is, you can talk about how these geniuses don't arise, or you can talk about how these geniuses don't actually profit from capitalism, because the people that profit from capitalism ultimately are just the ones that have money. I think both are valid rebuttals to different points of my argument. I guess the core of how to rebut is just this: try to find out what they have to prove in an argument and how they ultimately do it within debate. I guess the two questions are just, is it true what I just said? Just on a very intuitive level, we all have intuitions to what is true within this world and the reason as to why that is true. Just asking yourself, is it true what they just said will likely already service rebuttal to work with? This is often already what you tend to do. And also kind of, I think, sort of the responses that were flowing out of what I just, or with the previous exercise, is sort of the question you also tend to ask yourself, right? It's just proving the opposite, or at least proving that it's more nuanced than what I just explained. I guess the other question, which is a little bit underutilized, is just, maybe it's true what they said, but did they actually explain it within the debate? Because no, this is always what you have to do within the debate. I can be very, very right in something I'm saying, but insofar as I do not explain it within the debate, the judges also will not credit it. However, judges might just miss it, which means at the point where you notice that they didn't explain a certain thing, call it out. Just be like, they did not explain this link. They kind of had to do that in order for their argument to stand. Therefore, you cannot credit this, judges. Often this is something that people don't think they can do within debate. Just as a sense check, you can. And if the judge then disagrees with you, then shame on them, and try again next time. Because ultimately, it's sort of the idea within debate that people prove what they mean or what they're saying. And a lot of times people just get away with it because it isn't called out within debate that they didn't explain things that they had to. So the second question might even be more powerful here. I guess the rest of this points on rebut are mostly going to be on finding the points on where to rebut. I guess the way to do this is mostly just learn different strategies. And I will take you to two of them, which is, I just called them change of logic and from impacts to burden. I guess you can give them any other names, and I'm sure there's more strategies out there. Again, just try to find out more strategies, ask more speakers how they do it, because in that way you get more options and more things within your toolbox to actually beat other teams with. Just the first, which I called change of logic. And you kind of saw it already in my previous argument on capitalism, right? You have geniuses that now get recognized, that then get money, that then get the opportunity to improve the world, that then actually achieve change, stuff like climate change, right? These are different steps I made within my argument to reach the end impact, namely it improves society on a few axes like climate change, right? Every argument consists of such steps. And what is very important is that all of these steps require some amount of explanation. And this is what we call burden in debate, but basically it's the same as a premise if you're a little bit more into philosophy. Often what's very nice to do if you're trying to find where you need to rebut an argument is just write down these steps and see which part of the argument is actually the weakest. And there's two examples on the slide. That is, the first of all, on this house would institute a universal basic income. With a few steps. It starts with, right now, people are poor. Poverty is bad, or we don't want people to be poor. Because we now have a universal basic income, the policy alleviates poverty. And lastly, this will then improve the lives of people in poverty. This is the full argument, which runs from the first premise to the impact, namely we want to improve the lives of people in poverty. If you look at this as a very simple argument, is there any of these steps that you would think is most easy to rebut?
About said that poverty is bad because we know the capitalism is great because of the genius. And poverty is a normal thing in the capitalistic world.
Yes, I love this. I love this response. I'm not sure if it's for most people the most intuitive thing to prove. I guess there's some argument you can make that you need some amount of poverty in order for a society to function, because people need to be still incentivized to work. I think I'm not sure if it's the most intuitive though, or if it's the answer I will be going for. I'm not sure if there's any other response.
Well,
Maybe-
I can suggest that the part of the chain when the person will say the policy alleviates poverty, I think this is quite weak because we already in the world itself have some institutions that try to address poverty, and we see that they are not working. So I think this kind of can be a rebuttal for this.
Why is that? Why is it not working?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't know.
Okay, but it's a very good answer. You don't have to answer that question, by the way, because I think you were right on which part you should focus on in this rebuttal, which is just that this policy now alleviates poverty, right? And I think what you pointed towards is we already tried to do a bunch of stuff which isn't really working. So why would this specific thing then work? I guess another way to phrase it would be like it just misunderstands what poverty is, right? Maybe poverty is just people never really got educated on how to spend their money well, or they're into stuff like, or like they get addicted, or they get a lot of drawbacks, stuff like they're not insured for their healthcare, and now one of them has cancer and has an enormous amount of healthcare costs. All these things aren't really covered by the universal basic income. So if you can be like, the reasons as to why poverty exists are different, I guess that's a very effective rebuttal to what I just gave you. I'm also sorry, we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip the second example because I wanted to get to the last part of my workshop as well. But I will send the slides, which means you can do it as a take-home exercise if you want. Because here's a different one, which is a different strategy, which goes from impacts to burdens. And it's sort of the same as what we did previously, but then the other way around, which I think is also often more intuitive, at least for me. But I know a lot of speakers that do it, as I just show you in the first slide. Because what an argument ultimately is not only a step, it's also often, it works towards a specific impact. That is, you have a few burdens that you have to prove in order to access that impact. If you then identify the impact, you often also can work backwards to see which burdens actually prove that specific impact. That also prevents you from, for example, engaging with arguments that aren't as relevant in the debate, because you can just be like, okay, what's the biggest impact that they brought within the debate? Or what's the impact they most focus on? And what are the burdens that are very important for that impact to stand? This is something that you can do with this strategy that you can't really do with the first strategy, which I think is why I prefer this one, which I guess is also sort of an answer on prioritization, although it's not necessarily time spent. But this is definitely how you find out the most important arguments. Maybe just a general question. If you look at all these bullet points, what are the impacts? So what are the endpoints of the argument?
Can you repeat, please, the question?
So what are the impacts? I think another way to phrase the question is, what do we value in these arguments? As in, what is credited?
All right. I guess the main advantage and the main point of the resolution is to make life of the children and maybe their development better. So it's the main point of the argument, I guess. So all the impacts are considered to prove prove this thing.
Yes, you're definitely right. And I should have written that down on the slide. Maybe just what leads to kids having a good life? I think that's the question I wanted to ask.
Critical thinking and other life skills, perhaps.
Is there more?
It's having different ways to develop yourself. For example, being educated in different things.
It's not on the slide, just for reference, because we're trying to rebut an argument, right? So we're not trying to increase it. I think there's more impacts if people want to give it a try.
currently we're talking about the impacts or the burdens?
No, just the impacts now. We'll get to the burdens in the next slide.
Okay, I believe we can show them the alternative way to be successful. And they have a double benefit because they get the money and they become more, they just become smarter.
You're also trying to do my work for me, which is really good, because probably this is stuff I should have written down on these slides, namely stuff like money is probably also important and derives from these impacts. Maybe just to the specific things I wrote down on the slide. What are the impacts?
Maybe that the better performance is the impact. In the end, you perform better, and that is what gives you a better life.
And maybe also like smarter people in general, because they develop a better critical thinking, and therefore they can think more quality thinking.
Yeah, I think all of these are good answers. I underlined the 3 following, which I think are which are in itself good, right? I guess that's the way to think about impacts. What are things that are inherently good that I don't have to prove more to judges in order for them to make them understand that it's a good thing to begin with? I can probably still talk about why it's very, very important to do these things, but judges probably will buy that it's a good thing. It's stuff like joy of reading, the development of critical skills and other life skills, and better performance later in life. So these are the endpoints of the argument that are on the slide, right? Can you now maybe try to think about what are the steps leading up to either one of these 3 things? So the burdens that lead them to this specific point. For example, joy of reading, development of critical thinking, better performance later in life.
Maybe one of the burdens is maybe for example, better performance later in life. You have to prove that if you develop critical thinking skills and other life skills, and if you are exposed to more informative material, then this leads to getting more jobs and like studying more.
That's a fair answer. Is there anyone else?
Also, there are a lot of genres of the book and a lot of styles of writing. So by reading them, you like widen your horizons, and also you find a way to understand and witness many unreal or real situations, which would be really joyful to read and imagine. So it leads leads to joy of reading.
Yeah, I think that works. I haven't thought of that myself, honestly, but I think it works insofar as like if people get joy, then the other impacts also work, right? Fair enough. Yeah. Anyone else?
So I was thinking of like the logical steps that lead to like discovering the joy of reading, and actually I believe that like in this part like the argument can be rebutted, because like giving money like to kids for reading like gives them incentives like just to increase the numbers of the books read, so perhaps they will focus on like the quantity, so perhaps they will pay less attention to what they read and just try to like scan through the books, so that like it counts as a read book, and then like they just get money for that. So perhaps there is no causation between giving like some monetary incentives and kids discovering the joy of reading.
Yeah, you're amazing. You're one step ahead. So I guess I'll just skip this slide. I think, although these are sort of the burdens that lead up to the arguments that we were going to prove, right? That is, if you pay kids to read, it will motivate them to read more. I guess you already rebutted that by being like, maybe we're just going to prioritize the quantity of the books, right? Rather than actually reading the books or reading the right books. I guess the same goes for the other burdens, but maybe I can ask you, if you look at these burdens, so the green underlined thing as well as this aqua underlined thing, insofar as I think it's both a burden and an impact in itself. I think critical thinking skills in themselves are good, But I also think you need the critical thinking skills in order to have the better performance later in life. Any of these 4 burdens, are there any other ways to rebut them if you see them like this on the slide?
I think that.
Well, actually, I see one very important. Wait, I'm sorry.
Okay, first the boy, then the girl. Okay, sorry, I don't know your names because I can't see them.
Also, I think that the children are gonna think that the money are getting very easy because you just sit, read for a few hours, and you quote for example $10, and it easyfying. I don't know, is this word really existing? For kids to get money. So when they go to the work, they would be very upset, if this word right, because they are used to get money more easily.
That is fair, but which part of this argument does it attack, or is this a separate argument, you would say?
It's just a separate argument.
Mm-hmm. I think this is the distinction, right? So rebuttal is the things that straightforwardly engage with the argument that is brought by the opposing team. And you always have to do this, right? You always have to engage to some level with the arguments that are being brought by the opposing team. And you need to make your own arguments. I think it is valid to say what you said. I think it's not necessarily a rebuttal, and it won't be credited as such by judges, which is then often makes it harder to win if you don't do any rebuttal at all. There was a different answer, though. Yeah.
Actually, I see one more problem here. Actually, we do not really focus on the quality of the books children read. As Irina earlier said, they may just read some very thin books for the result. However, that's the first problem, because usually children tend to read something really simplistic, and it does not guarantee that they are going to read more easily some more complicated things which they will need in their career. The second point, whether they will continue reading when they are adults. Because, for example, in childhood, they have this motivation in the form of money. And later on, they are not going to have this motivation, and they would be rather motivated to do something else that will bring them money, because money gives you opportunity to buy more things. Thus, the government has the burden to prove that, first of all, this motivation will be kept by them for the rest of their life. Secondly, that they will get the ability to perceive easier complicated things, despite the fact that they are going to be reading just some simplistic things or some trash like this.
Do they have to prove that you keep the money for the rest of your life, or that you value money to the same extent for the rest of your life? Or is it just nice to get money right now, and that will get all the things that are mentioned on the slide? Again, is it like a separate argument, or is it engaging with the argument on screen?
Well, actually, it engages with, first of all, the development of critical thinking, and secondly, with the joy of reading. To which extent this joy of reading will be more valuable than the money, which may help you to bring different other joys. You may buy delicious food. You may buy, for example, something for surfing and do surfing. You may travel. You may do plenty of different things and get joy from them, but not from reading.
Mm-hmm. I think this is all fair to an extent. And I think what it also shows is, if you point out which specific part of the argument it then relates to, it also becomes more clear what you're actually trying to do with this argument and how you're trying to rebut it, right? So it becomes specifically more clear if you tell me what part of the argument you're engaging with. I have a few ideas myself, and I think a few of them were already mentioned. That is, first of all, to what degree are libraries actually able to check against frauding or cheating? Can I be like, I'm just going to loan 100 books and bring them back the next day? How's the library going to check if I actually read them, right? Stuff like, will more kids really read for a reward? I guess it depends on how high the reward is, right? But if it's like 10 cents, I probably won't be really motivated to read more. It will just be like a nice little extra. I had a few other ideas. If kids are only reading for a reward, will they really critically engage with the text? I think this is already mentioned, right? Will they not just pick easy text? I guess that's the fourth one as well. I guess I don't really know why these two are split up in two. Maybe just shortly on positioning and weighing, or maybe not shortly, we'll see how it goes. Because very often what tends to happen is that teams prove different behaviors for the same actor. And this is what we call a clash. That is, these two things cannot coexist. So stuff like how rich people deal with geniuses in capitalism, which is something that was mentioned before, is a clash. That is, rich people either give money to geniuses or they do not because they want to remain in power, right? These two things cannot coexist, which means if your argument is reliant on one of these things, participating in a clash, you actually have to engage with it a lot more. This is often what points you towards the most important things within the debate, because if two things cannot be true at the same time, you need to win that clash in order to win your argument as well. You don't really have another way. So if there's one thing that you should prioritize, it's always prioritize the things that are both important for your case to stand as well as for their case to fall back on, right? So your job is then simply to do two things, and that is, first of all, to explain it better. That is, combine rebuttal and rebuilding, spend more time on it, give more reasons, and just ask yourself, why is this true? Why is this important? More times than the opponent has asked themselves that. Or in the reverse, like, why is what the opponent told you not true or not important? I guess what positioning and weighing really comes down to is going one step further, right? That is explaining to the judges why you explained it better. Because otherwise the judges have to do this for you, which again then means that it's more likely that they will actually weigh against you because you didn't really explain it to them. If you explain it to them, you actually do the work for them, which means because they're lazy, they will just are more likely to copy what you already said, right? It's very nice if someone explains to you why they won the debate as a judge, because then you don't have to think about it. Especially if you have to weigh off 4 teams and eight speakers, it's often quite complicated. If people give you good reasons how to do the weighing, that is quite convincing. So please do it. There's a few things on how you can weigh. That is, most commonly, you can do it on the impacts, so on the harm and benefits. That is stuff like kids now get more opportunities later in life and develop critical thinking skills, right? The impacts itself, what we talked about. And there's a bunch of metrics on which you can then argue why you're winning that impact, right? Or why that impact is very important. I wrote a few down on the slide. First of all, you can talk about the scope. That is, maybe a lot of people are affected by your argument. For example, if you talk about climate change, you can be like, this affects everyone, and also all the people that come after our generation will also be affected by climate change. Therefore, our argument is very important. It goes to severity, right? Stuff like, just as a sense check, like if 100 people give me €1, then 100 people are kind of screwed over because they lose out on €1, but I will gain €100, and that will probably make me significantly more happy, right? So the severity of the benefit for me is a lot higher, which probably weighs off against how sad everyone is for losing a single €1. This is how you weigh on severity. You can also do it on principles. That is, sometimes there isn't really a reason, like a utilitarian reason as to why we value things, but some things we just deem very important. That is stuff like just bodily autonomy. I shouldn't be able to get killed. I should have my own property and people cannot just steal it from me. I need privacy. Stuff like people or companies can't just hack into my computer and take all my data. All these things are principles, and they're valued to some extent higher because they invade into something very personal, very individual of mine. Often also explaining that principle then weighs within the debate, and weighs quite heavily if you actually make it. I guess principle is also a very different thing to do, which might justify a different workshop, but that's the basic of it. You can also do it on justification. Some people we just care more about. Think about children, for example. Like, I care a lot about children, and I also think that specific actors have a duty towards them. For example, parents towards their children. If parents get harmed to a certain extent to help their children, I think overall that is fair because they have a duty to do so, right? It also goes for example, minorities in society a lot, or people that are already poor within society that we're trying to help because they get screwed up more once we don't do that, whereas we don't care as much for rich people because they will probably be fine anyway. Lastly, it goes to exclusivity. I think exclusivity is a sort of underutilized one, which is very important. And it's stuff like, are there any other options to achieve the same thing? You can probably think about the example on universal basic income, right? And the rebuttal to it. I'm not sure who said it, but it was said that there's probably different reasons as to why poverty exists. And you're not going to solve that with the universal basic income. I guess you can also weigh this on exclusivity and be like, there are so many other things that we have tried and we can try to alleviate poverty that will probably be more effective and doesn't require us to impose a universal basic income, which will probably make us spend so much money, right? Probably because there's some harm that you can then prove, namely we spent a lot of money, and you can prove that there's a lot of other ways in which you can fix their problem, the problem that the opposition is then, or the government is in this case claiming to solve. You can still win this debate on exclusivity, even if you cannot really outweigh the harm in that way. The other way to do it is just on the mechanism, so not really the impacting itself. And this goes to the burdens. That is, have they actually proven everything that they were supposed to be proven, but also have they actually proven it to such an extent that it is likely and it is believable and it is more likely and it is more believable than the things that we brought? Say, for example, stuff like, we talked about climate change. That is, maybe teams will stand up and be like, everyone's gonna die, or stuff like there's gonna be a full-on war and everyone's gonna die because of that. All of these arguments sound very important, right? And they attack a large scope of people. A lot of people are affected very severely, and it's all very, very bad. However, it's also very, very hard to prove these things. Therefore, if these arguments happen within debate, you're probably better off saying, okay, maybe there's a 1% chance that their case will happen, but there's an 80% chance that our case will happen, and it's not as bad, but because it's so much more likely, we tend to also have to prioritize our case because we always take some amount of risk, right? Like if I walk outside, there's always a risk that I will be hit with a brick on my head and I will die immediately. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go outside. I always consciously make the way off between the likelihood of something happening and the harm it will do to me. I think these are also things that you can bring on debate. That is generally how you weigh, but maybe to check your intuition a little bit on the motion, this House regrets the use of referenda as a means to make political decisions. And there's two arguments on this slide. That is, firstly, most people do not have time to understand complex policy issues, which means they will vote irrationally and are at risk for being influenced by populism to vote against their own interests. Did everyone get that? And the second one is, referenda are inherently more representative than representative democracy, because I guess that argument didn't make sense. Referenda, oh yeah, it does make sense. Referenda are inherently more representative than representative democracy. And I guess I meant they're just elections because people know what is best for themselves and policy will be more in their interest. What argument do you prefer and why?
Macy?
Yeah, go ahead.
The first one beats the second one because in second one we're having the statement that people know which is better for them, so they are voting as so they make elections, they're voting. But the first one argument says that most of them are too lazy or just don't know the severe or just deep political statements and can really be victims of populism. So as for me, the first statement beats the second one.
Yeah.
Because it shows the influence on the actors and it shows more likely happen in influence on the actors.
Yes, and I think this is the right answer. I'm not sure if there is another answer, but it will be my answer as well. That is, the second argument relies on the premise that people know what is best for them. And this argument engages with exactly that aspect, right? That is, people don't know what is best for them. They will vote irrationally and are at risk of being influenced by populism because they have trouble and don't have the time to understand complex policy. I think this then engages with this. Therefore, one is more mechanistically sound, and therefore it wins over the second argument. And I think insofar as you can identify and explain why that is true, you also know how to do weighing. I guess the only problem is that often in debate this goes very quickly. So therefore you need to do a little bit more prioritization, that is focus on the arguments that are actually important within debate without getting distracted by all the bullshit and all the crap that happens around it, right? Which I want to talk about now. I know I have 9 minutes, but that's fine because the other 2 chapters are not that long. So what to prioritize, right? I think at the end of the day, everything is rebuttable and weighable to some extent. But often the question is really, is it worth it to do it? And it's good to remember then that you do not have to rebut or weigh everything within the debate in order to win that debate, right? You don't have to engage with everything. You just have to be a little bit better and engage with the important aspects of each case. So how you do that is just a weigh-off between 2 sides. That is, how much effort is it going to cost me to weigh or rebut this thing? So sometimes an argument sounds very stupid and it's very easy to rebut. Other times an argument is really hard to rebut because people put a lot of work into it and it sounds very intuitive towards judges. That means it's just going to take more effort to take it down. The second thing you have to weigh off is then how important is it for us to win over them? That is, maybe it's a very mechanistically sound and good made argument because it's actually very important for them to win. So maybe it's going to require you a lot of time to rebut it, but it's still worth it because otherwise they will be winning and otherwise we cannot win because, for example, these arguments are clashing, right? I think these 2 questions you need in order to prioritize and decide what you actually need in order to win a debate. So just a sense check on what you should prioritize as a second speaker specifically, right? Ultimately, your job is to simp on your first speaker. So in preparation, that means try to help them and try to understand your own case so that you're not misunderstanding your own case during the debate yourself. It's often very nice if your second speaker actually knows the case a little bit better than your first speaker, because now they're better able to defend it against all the rebuttal that has come out of your opponent team, as well as they are better able to rebuild those arguments and rebut all the other things in the debate, right? So try to really put effort into in preparation into understanding the case, contributing to the case, helping your first speaker. That's very important to do also for yourself, because now you're better able and better positioned within the debate. During the debate, try to link back many times as you can to your first speaker, to what they already said and to the case that they brought, because sure, there's other responses that are happening in other cases within the debate, and sure, it's nice if you respond to them, but often this is how I see debate, and maybe other speakers will disagree with me. That is, debating is just about towers, right? If you build a very good argument, you build a very high tower. Ultimately, the team that wins is the team that builds the highest tower. You can also destroy other people's towers by, for example, using a cannon and shooting down their tower. That's what we call rebuttal, and what we've been talking about the entire time. But there's 4 teams in a debate, and there's only one of you, which means it's quite likely that it's worth it to do more rebuilding on your own case, because it always increases the tallness of your own tower, instead of you doing rebuttal towards one specific team, which still leaves 2 other teams unharmed. So ultimately, the sense check is you can quite likely still win without rebutting, insofar as you have a very good case and you win all the mechanistic burdens you need to prove that case. However, you cannot really win if your case doesn't stand to begin with. You can do a lot of rebutting, but it doesn't really matter insofar as you don't have a case to begin with. This is also a sense check for first speakers, by the way. If you're a first speaker, please prioritize your own case first, and don't even do rebuttal. You have a second speaker for that. Or if you can do some easy rebuttal or some very necessary rebuttal, go for it. Or some very easy or necessary positioning, go for it. But please deprioritize it, because your case is by far the most important thing within a debate, because your case is ultimately what decides if you win or not. That's what I wanted to say about prioritization. And then I'll go to structure, which is also my last slide, and then we'll be right on time for the debate. This is how I do it. That is, try to keep all these 3 elements separate. That is, you have rebuilding, you have positioning, and you have rebutting. And sometimes I combine rebuilding and positioning because you can integrate them to an extent insofar as you might not need as much rebuilding within your case. So maybe you can integrate those two, but definitely keep rebuilding and rebutting apart. And you can just use multiple papers for that, right? Like what I tend to do. Maybe I wanted to put slides in there for, or like pictures of my debate notes, but I did the debate yesterday. You can maybe see if you can see how many papers I'm using for a single speech. It's a ton of them, and it's for good reasons. It's because it gives me structure on which part of my speech I actually tend to have to focus on and which I'm at, right? That is, my first paper is always the rebuilding and positioning, or in this case, the first is rebuilding, the second is positioning. Stuff you write down here is stuff like, what has my partner already told you? What was the response to their case? And what is the things that I will still want to add on top of that? Stuff like rebuilding the case. So what hasn't my partner told you? And why is that important? And secondly, what has my partner told you and why is it important? These two things you need to always have on your first paper. And it's the most important thing if you're a second speaker. It doesn't matter if you're in closing or opening for this one. For the second one, it matters a little bit more because rebuttal is mostly important if you're a web speaker, because there have just been more teams, and you probably know the responses to all of your cases because there's likely not going to be as many rebuttal to your case anymore. Maybe you're in CG and there's still a CO web speaker, but also they have to divert their attention to 3 teams, which means you can probably get away with more rebuttal in closing and less rebuilding and positioning, whereas in opening you need to do more rebuilding and positioning and less rebuttal, if that makes sense. I guess there's 2 strategies to do rebuttal. That is, you can separate per team, which is just write down what every team says and then try to find rebuttals to it. Like think about the exercise we've done beforehand, right? This is often very easy for you because it's generally how the debate goes, right? Like speakers stand up after each other for each team, so you know which team is speaking. The other way to do it is per clash. So what are the important things within the debate? And a lot of teams often interact with that very same argument. For example, how capitalists manage their own money. Often it's very effective within your speech to do this, but it requires quite some knowledge and a quite good grasp of the debate. That also means it's a little bit more risky. So I also, like as a recommendation, I always tend to go team by team, and I try to make notes when the bench, so for example, if I'm in CG, and then I will make a note if OO and CO are going for the exact same argument, and I will try to group them to not spend more time than I need, because otherwise I'm going to repeat myself. If they're both doing the same argument, then it's probably also going to be the same rebuttal. Then it's worth it to combine them. But most of the time it's really easy, and it makes you feel way nicer and way more relaxed if you just go team by team. The other reason why that's nice is because now I can shift around the order of the teams I'm going to discuss them in. Because maybe CG will be a threat to me, but CG spoke last. Now I have them on a separate paper, which means I can just put them in my stack first, which means I will discuss CG first and then the other teams. That's what it allows me to do. That I cannot do that if I have it all over my sheet and I don't really know where the rebuttal towards CG was already, right? I think all of these things are ways to structure your speech a little bit better. I think that's all I wanted to say. I'm also looking to the questions I received beforehand. And I'm not sure if I've answered all of them. If I have not, maybe this is the point to raise them again and I can try to still talk about it a little bit more, even though it's 2015.
Actually, I have another question which I didn't manage to ask you at the very beginning. For example, if we have the case where the principal argument is proven perfectly, so you cannot rebut it by giving examples when it doesn't really work out or when it is not really, when this principle is not broken. So, for example, if I have ideally proven principle argument on my on the opposition bench, and I'm the government. How can I make the weighting to make the utilitarian arguments more important in this case? Or if the only way is to bring some other principle which is going to be stronger than this one?
I mean, assuming it's a perfect principle, there's no reason for you to bring another principle or try to weigh it, right? Like if Jesus Christ will give you a principle, then probably that's the principle that will win the debate, right? I guess you can try to debate something like in crisis situation, we tend to devalue certain principles. So in extreme examples, this principle would still not apply. But in general, you cannot do this. If people run perfect arguments, run very good principles, and you cannot come up with counterexamples that disprove that principle, I guess they will win that debate. Which means my best advice will be there's still two other teams in the debate, try to win over them. But I'm not sure if that's a very convenient answer for you.
Well, I just meant the situation when, for example, you cannot find the examples of breaking this principle so easily. So the only way you have is to try to compare it with your utilitarian arguments, which may be beaten by this principle. So what should we do in this case?
I mean, yeah, but the annoying part about principles is that they're only disprovable by counterexamples, or if your opposition didn't do as much weighing as to why that principle is very important, right? I guess these are the two ways in which you can beat a principle. But the thing with principles is that they're not utilitarian, so you cannot really minimize them. You can either disprove them or be like, they didn't explain why it was important, so it doesn't stand within debate, even though it might be true what they were saying. So yeah, principles are a little bit different in this respect, and it's really annoying if you're up against a principle that you don't really know how to disprove. Just try to find more examples and think harder.
Well, so maybe we just may come up with another principle which will beat this boss.
Yes, I think that could work, right? But then still the principle stands within the debate. So it's very hard to weigh off against principles and be like, this principle we value more, even though you cannot come up with any mitigation towards their principle. So in a vacuum, it's really hard to do this. But like in a real debate, you will always have some capacity to find examples or counter examples towards their principle, or find situations in which they don't apply, and just pick the most extreme random stuff, right? In this case, if it's really that narrow, just talk about stuff like principles we threw out when we, for example, had COVID and we didn't care as much about privacy anymore. Like, these extreme examples will probably give you the narrow margins you need to then weigh over your own utilitarian case or your principle. But it's not very easy to do in this specific context. I also think we need to move on a little bit because we're 4 minutes over time, and I think there's people waiting as well. Or I guess we still first need to do the motion, but maybe overall